Spider-Man Far From Home swung into theaters a couple weeks back, giving us a web of new villains to discuss. So today we're going to stop and rank all 14 main Spider-Man movie villains from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section, share your ranking. I only included the main villains in my list, but if you want to include some of the henchmen like Shocker and Tinkerer in your list, feel free to do so. And finally, you're probably here because you enjoy hearing me talk about movies way too much, and I'm always looking for new places to talk about movies. So I was excited when I found out about Amino's new Stories features. Stories are high energy, quick moving videos. They just rolled out some new interactive poll and quiz features as well. So while watching one of my reviews, you can share your take on the movie in a fun, interactive way. Over the last 3 months, I've partnered with Amino and created a bunch of exclusive stories. So what's awesome about Stories is I can share my thoughts in bite-sized fashion right there on my phone, and they don't disappear after 24 hours. You can find these exclusive stories at the link down below in the description, or by typing in Sean Chandler Talks About in the search bar in Discovery. Make sure to follow me and click the bell to know when I'm posting new videos. So this is a simple and free way you can support my channel and get more great content. Once again, you can find these exclusive videos at the link down below in the description. And with that said, let's get started. Coming in last place is the Rhino from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is a classic example of a bad idea executed even worse. On paper, the idea of casting Paul Giamatti as the Rhino is fantastic because he's a world-class actor who can be intense, he can be fun, he can do all of it. But what they did with this film captures none of his acting talent or the character from the comic books, as in the film at the beginning, he's just a bank robber screaming like a maniac, and then they bookend it at the end with him in this big robot suit, but none of it actually explores the character. Very clearly, they cast Paul Giamatti because they wanted a world-class talent for when he had a bigger role in the Sinister Six film down the road, but as that film never came to be, they just wasted a great talent, they wasted a great comic book character, and had a screaming idiot in this film. Number 13 is Venom from Spider-Man 3. This is a horrible waste of a great character. He's underutilized, he's visualized in a weird way, and he feels very tacked on. It's well documented that Sam Raimi did not want to do the Venom storyline, but he was told that he had to by the producers, in which case he just feels shoehorned into a film that's already pretty crowded. So the character of Venom doesn't show up until the final like 20 or 30 minutes of the film when he is on screen. For some reason, they were very quick to just have his face disappear and have Eddie Brock, played by Topher Grace's head, floating on top of this CGI body. So while there is some cool action at a few points in time, the actual execution of this amazing character falls entirely flat and does no justice to the source material. Coming in at number 12 is Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is another total fumble. Right off the bat, the character arc that they chose for the character was plucked straight out of Batman Forever, The Incredibles, and Iron Man 3. It's extraordinarily reminiscent of this plotline of the nerdy guy that gets burned by the hero and turns into a supervillain. It's also tonally inconsistent with the rest of the film in that when he's Jamie Foxx, the actor, he's so cornball and over the top that it doesn't mesh with everything else inside of the film. There's also some just bizarre choices where they actually have, when he gains his superpowers, it fixes his teeth, which is such a specific and weird thing to put inside of a film. Now, there are some cool action sequences, especially when they do like the slow-mo in Times Square, but besides that, I did not enjoy this character. Next up is the Sandman from Spider-Man 3. Now, I don't think that this is a terrible villain, but because they chose to kind of rehash and re-explore the Uncle Ben storyline and crammed him into a movie that had a bunch of other villains inside of it, he never really gets anything unique or distinct about him as a character. Even inside of his origin story, they try and have this idea that he's trying to take care of his family and sick kids and things like that to try and justify all of these things that he's doing, but it falls flat because he never feels all that remorseful throughout the course of the film for everything that he's done. So while he's never really an embarrassment, he always just feels like a rehash of old storylines and a villain we never really get to know. Bringing us into the top 10 is Dr. Olivia Octavius from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now this is a fun little villain that has some important things that she does throughout the plot of the film, but they don't really give her a big character arc or anything like that. She doesn't really have a motivation for what she's doing other than kind of being a mad scientist, and she works well inside of that function, especially the way they kind of incorporate her into the story in the first act of the film as just a respected scientist, and then as the film goes along, we discover things about her. I liked all of those nice touches. She had a personality that popped a little bit, but once again, she's not like a great villain with a master plan that you really care about. Next up is Harry Osborn, Green Goblin from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, during the first half of this film, I really enjoyed the character interactions between Peter Parker and Harry Osborn. Mark Webb is very good at those types of moments, and Dane DeHaan plays them really well. But as you move into the second half of the film, and they have to transition Harry from the friend into the person desperate to stop an illness, it kind of falls really flat for me because the movie establishes that he has like 40 years before this disease is going to kill him. But for some reason, they rush turning him into the Green Goblin. Well, I guess we know the reason. They wanted to have Green Goblin kill Gwen Stacy in the third act of this film. And because of this, they force urgency into the plotline that shouldn't really be there. They force conflict with Peter Parker that doesn't really belong there. And I don't really buy into this whole turning him into a literal goblin thing that they did with the film. So there's things I really liked about the character, but they rushed it way too much. Number 8 is the Lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man. Now this is probably the most forgettable of the Spider-Man villains for me because he doesn't do anything so bad that he sticks out, and he doesn't do anything particularly good either. He's just kind of a generic Spider-Man villain. He's a good guy that experiments on himself and turns into a supervillain. Now in that, he's a perfectly fine version of that. There's a nice third act inside of it with some good action. The library fight sequence is quite cool, but beyond that, he's just generic Spider-Man villain guy, so he kind of falls right in the middle on this list. Next up is the new Goblin from Spider-Man 3. This is Harry Osborn turned into the Green Goblin, and there was a lot of potential and a lot of things I really liked about what they did with Harry in this film. And then there's some very odd execution inside of it as well. On the base level of his anger over the discovery that Spider-Man and then Peter Parker is the person responsible for his father's death, that's some powerful stuff that fits inside of this trilogy. And then it kind of leads to the big action sequence chase between the two of them that is really held back by, I think, them trying to do some things that the special effects weren't quite ready to do yet, leading to him getting injured. And the direction they went with Franco's performance, I thought was kind of cornball and felt very odd for him as an actor. And then when they try and loop back to he's angry again, I didn't think that quite worked. But where it ends the film of kind of having that redemption, going to battle Sandman and Venom, that was powerful stuff once again. So there's a bunch of things about him where it just kind of pulls me in several different directions. I liked the basic overall idea of what they were doing with Harry inside of this film as a villain that gets redemption. But the specific execution I don't think was the strongest. Coming in at number 6 is the Prowler from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now this is a great example of how a villain doesn't need a bunch of screen time or to do something super evil to stand out. Here, the simple betrayal of the fact that Miles Morales' uncle is a villain works to make him interesting and compelling inside of the story. We get a little bit of action inside of the mix with his character, but it's those revelations of who he is, his relationship with Miles Morales, and the fact that he realizes, wow, I'm the villain in those moments, that makes him someone that had, in just his limited amount of screen time, something very profound inside of the story. Coming in at number 5 is Mysterio from Spider-ManFar From Home. This is a character that had a bunch of things I really liked and then a few things that just held him back. Right off the bat, Jake Gyllenhaal just does a great job with the character because you absolutely buy him as this hero that's trying to save the world from another dimension, and then at the same time you buy him as the psycho that's trying to puff himself up as a fake hero. He delivers all of it. He can be fun. he can be charismatic, he can be the mentor, he can be funny. It all worked. Likewise, the visualization of when he kind of traps Spider-Man inside of the illusions was fantastic. It's one of the most creative action sequences of the last 10 years. It absolutely works inside of it. Where he falls back for me is I think that there's a bit of a motivation gap for his character that I just couldn't buy, having seen the movie a couple of times. So they have this idea that he feels burned by Tony Stark and has all these other people that also were burned by Tony Stark, and they don't think Tony should have given the glasses to Spider-Man. Therefore, they team up to create their own fake superhero to kind of put Tony in his place and take it back from Spider-Man. Which you can buy into that to some extent, but I don't, when they have a point in time in the film where they actually say, we're gonna kill a bunch of people, and Mysterio's okay with that, maybe I could buy that, but everyone else goes along with it as well. And the idea that this many people were just like disgruntled employees and therefore are okay with killing a bunch of civilians just to prop up Mysterio as a fake superhero, I just didn't really buy it. And I think they could have done a little bit more inside of it to kind of explain what his plan was of why he thought that this was a great superhero plan or supervillain plan to become a superhero. I just didn't get there. And then the other thing was the way that they did the twist reveal and having him give a big toast speech where he explains his evil plan kind of felt like the laziest possible way to deliver all of that information. So that also was a frustration that kind of knocked him back a little bit. Next up is Kingpin from Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. Now this was such a cool way to take the classic Kingpin character and give him a motivation that would lead him to create the multiverse or to bridge the gap between the multiverse, where you have this villain who is so self-centered and through his actions leads to the death of his family, but can't take responsibility for that. Therefore, he wants to steal other versions of these people from other dimensions and bring them to be his family in this dimension. Is such an insane plan that fits perfectly into the delusional mind of the Kingpin. And so this was one that I thought hit on some really deep, powerful stuff, as you feel bad for him, even though he is an absolute monster that's responsible for so much that's happening, but he is unable to accept that himself. And so for me, that was just some pretty profound stuff. Real quick before I give you my top 3, if you've enjoyed this video and want more Spider-Man content from me, check out this playlist up above once this video is done. It's got my ranking of all the Spider-Man movies, the Spider-Man actors, my review of Spider-Man, the PlayStation 4 game, all of that fun stuff. If you've enjoyed this video, there's something up there that you will love. Coming in third place is Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2. Once again, we get a classic Spider-Man villain brought to life by the lively performance from Alfred Molina. And while on paper, he's very much like so many of the other Spider-Man villains in that he's a good-natured guy whose own experiments drive him mad and he becomes a supervillain. But here we get just a little bit more time with him as a family man. We meet his wife. We know what he's trying to do for the betterment of mankind and how through the experiment and what happens with it, that drives him insane. And they also give him more of a redemptive arc as you move into the third act of the film, where just a little bit there, he snaps out of it enough and doesn't want to die the monster, leading to a very powerful third act inside of this film. And the reason it works is because we see him as the family man wanting to do the right thing. We see him as the monster that just does not care about people in the middle of the film. And then he has that redemption to pull himself back, leading to a great villain. Our runner-up is the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn from the original film Spider-Man. What I think makes him such a compelling villain to me inside of this film is that we spend a lot of time with him. He has as much of an origin story as Peter Parker has inside of this film, as we see him as the father, we see him as the scientist, we see him as the disgruntled businessman, and we see him driven insane. And all of this works wonderfully because Willem Dafoe is such a fantastic actor that can play a normal guy, he can play the condescending father, and he can go crazy when he needs to go crazy, and he goes bonkers inside of this film. And as you move into his final moments and he seems genuinely concerned that his son will find out how evil he's become, it's those little moments that make you care about him. One of the critiques of the MCU is that the villains haven't gotten enough time. This film right here gives an example of how powerful a villain can be when you do incorporate them throughout the entire film and give them that full character arc. But coming in at number 1 is the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, this is a villain that I have just always absolutely loved because in his mind, he's not the villain. He's just a guy trying to take care of his family, and he's slowly made a series of bad choices that have turned him into a supervillain arms dealer selling alien weapons to street gangs. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like the Walter White of the MCU. Of course, the reason that his performance works is they got this fantastic actor, Michael Keaton, to play the role, and he can be the charming father, he can be the guy in the suit, he can be the guy staring down Peter Parker in a car holding onto a gun and making it absolutely terrifying. I love the fact that he doesn't have some big evil scheme to blow up the city. He's just a guy thinking about his own family and deluded by his own selfishness and everything that's come with that. So for me, he comes in at number 1. You can check out those exclusive videos from Amino at the link down below. You can see more Spider-Man videos from me right over there in that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.